Alright, welcome to the next lesson. I cut the last one short a little bit, and just because I knew this one would probably go about the same amount of time, just want to give you a really long video again, especially for those at home. So, anyways, the Qin Dynasty. Well, what we talked about in the last lesson was legalism being one of the last philosophies, not the last philosophies, but the third of the third philosophy that we talked about, the last one we talked about, and talking about all these ideas the Chinese were coming up with is like, how do we create a good society again? How do we have one that provides that safety and security and happiness that we need? Well, in the end, you have a state win out, and it is the state of Qin, which, ironically, I think I'm using that word right, was actually one of the smaller states to begin with, one of the smaller kingdoms to begin with in the Warring States period. And they went out. And there's two major reasons why they win. One is actually geographical, and this is where I kind of wish I would have put more of a map up here, but this, I've actually been to this area of China, basically where the state of Qin is located, and it's in a very defensible valley. It has mountains all around with really about one major way to get into the valley, but you don't have to have a huge army to just stopgap that valley. And so the people of Qin, the state of Qin, were usually able to fend off the invaders and just kind of do their own thing. So they were able to survive just when everybody else started going down. And like I said earlier, it started off with 50 some odd states, condensed down to 30 some odd states, and goes down to 13, and then goes down to 7. And the state of Qin was one of those 7. Although when you get to it, they're one of the biggest ones at that point. And that comes down to the second reason why they're able to do so well, aside from geography. And geography is what protected them in the first place, but they utilized legalism. So basically, we get to a guy named Qin Shi Huangdi. This is one of the biggest names of all Chinese history. This whole lesson is basically on him. When we talk about big names in United States history, we think of people like George Washington, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan, Abraham Lincoln. These are big names in American history that essentially did a lot. They're always talked about. Let's put it that way. Qin Shi Huangdi, he is that guy for China. In fact, it is from his name and the name of his kingdom that we even get the word China today. Qin, China. Hopefully, you're kind of getting the idea there. So, and I say it down at the bottom too of the PowerPoint. Now, when I said that they embraced legalism, they really embraced legalism, like a very strict form of legalism. They impose it first on their state, and then they seek to impose it on everywhere else. And this is basically how it goes. And Han Fei-si, actually the guy who creates legalism, is one of the advisors to Qin Shi Huangdi. Kind of no surprise there, I guess you could say. Qin Shi Huangdi embraces it, and he does so in a way where, okay, how do I put this? Right off the bat, I need to explain this. The Chinese look at this guy as, like a father of China, like the guy he needed to happen type thing. And he's an overall good person. From an American perspective, from a Western civilization perspective, Qin Shi Huangdi is not one of the best people ever to live in human history. We have some issues and some problems with this guy. So just need to put that down in place first. You need to know that the Chinese do view this guy as like the father, in many ways, the father of China. Even given all of his, what you could call faults. Although, again, the Chinese would explain those faults away, and I'll explain that when we get there. Whereas we'd look at this and say, no, we don't. We would never want to see this guy ever come into power in any one of our, the United States, France, or whatever. So, anyways, just need to put that up front, let you know how it's going. And a lot of it has to do with the legalist policies. But where I was going before, I was just saying that when he adopts legalism, well, from what we're told and what we know, he lives those laws himself. He doesn't necessarily see himself as above the law like so many rulers in history do. It's like, well, I'm telling you what to do, but I don't have to follow my own rules. It's kind of, oh God, I just had a lot of examples in my mind come into place, actually, of teachers. How we'll have rules and we break them ourselves. I do my best not to do that myself, but I imagine I have here and there. So, anyways, just basically hypocritical. So, but from what we're told, Qin Shi Huangdi, not necessarily a hypocrite, and probably is one of the reasons why, if that being true, Why is people at least willing to follow him? At least one of the reasons. Probably the main reason why people are willing to follow him, though, is because, well, he put really strict rules and punishments in place. He had a very strict form of legalism in place. Like, if you do... This guy is like... well, we haven't gotten to talking about it. Like Draco of Athens, if you know who that is. Or a little bit like Hammurabi, I guess you could say. Basically, do anything and you're dead. Just steal something, you're dead. Disobey your parents, you're dead. Just, I don't know if that rule's in there. I know the still bread is, but just do anything wrong and you're dead. And this had a bit of a culling effect. I don't know if you know what a culling is. How do I explain what a culling is? Someone wants to pause the video and explain to someone else what a culling is. Like a rooting out of your own people, like where you're like kind of destroying yourself in order to perfect yourself type thing. Oh god, there's so many ways that could be taken in a wrong way, but just moving on. But yeah, there's a bit of a culling within the state of Qin, where a lot of people are put to death for doing things wrong. Show up to work late, wrong. Show up tardy for class, dead. So, excuse me. Anyways, the thing is that people start getting the ideas like, if I want to live, then I better follow the dang rules. And so the state of Qin starts doing that. But then they also start realizing, holy cow, those of us that are actually doing what we're supposed to be doing, this is working pretty good. We're like a well-oiled machine here. Not just our economy, the idea of agriculture, getting our farms taken care of, our lives taken care of, buildings built and things like that, because everybody's doing what they should be to do because they're incredibly fearful of being killed if they don't. But the military, like no one shirks military duty. They're incredibly well disciplined, and they turn out to have, because of this legalist philosophy, the Qin army becomes one of the better trained and well disciplined armies, probably not just of Chinese history, but of all history. And even though their army in the beginning isn't as big as other states, it is a heck of a lot more effective. And with that, they're able to conquer everybody else, and they do it in short order. I should probably have a slide in between that last slide and this one, just talking about how they do it. In fact, I need to. I'm going to go all the way back here to where I show a picture of that warring states. Please tell me I have this in. There we go. So look how big the state of Qin is there. It's massive. It makes it seem like it was one of the biggest ones ever, but it actually starts really tiny just up in the corner. So, well, in a corner, I should say. Now, this is when things get down to the last 7 states. And we have records, although written by the Qin, of how they went to war against, say, the state of Zhao, I think I'm saying that right, and the state of Wei. So, this one here and this one here. They went to war with Zhao first, and then Wei later. But when they go to war with the state of Zhao, just long story short, I usually have a movie I like to show with this. It's a Chinese-made movie from about 20 years ago called Hero. Love the movie, but again, I'm sorry I'm not there at the moment, but yeah. But when the state of Qin attacks the state of Zhao, after all the battles and everything's done, it's said that, at least this is what the records say, that they captured the Qin army captured 250,000 Zhao soldiers. Okay, modern historians think these numbers are overblown, but this is what the Qin is saying. They're saying we captured 250,000 soldiers after all the death and destruction that happened in the war leading up to the surrender. And then Qin Shi Huangdi, with his legalist mindset, you can't trust anybody, everybody's born evil, thinks that, you know what, these people fought against me, they'll probably always fight against me, and they'll probably have taught their children to not like me. So, kill them all. Just kill them all. So according to the records of the state of Qin, during the Warring States period, they take those 250,000 prisoners and their families and execute them all. Okay, that is just beyond craziness, and this is one of the reasons I said earlier in the lesson that we look at this guy and saying, who are you? That you're not cool. So, what the Chinese argue, though, just getting into this now, is that it was needed. It just needed to happen. He brought peace and security, he brought unification back to the land, and if a few people had to die, couple 100,000 people had to die, then so be it. So I hope you're seeing the major moral dilemma right there. That definitely does not go along with our idea of right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So, anyways, by the way, the state of Wei, again, according to the records, and if I remember reading my textbook, or not my textbook, my college book, just right, this and other books I've read on ancient China, just the number that I remember popping out to me is it said that 450,000 people were captured, and then they were all killed with their families as well. Just beyond crazy. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just exaggerating more than the Qin are exaggerating. I need to go look this up again. Holy cow. Like, they're bragging about this. Anyways, to us, in our way of thinking, it's like, why do you brag about this? That is beyond crazy. So, again, historians believe that those numbers are way overblown. I personally think those numbers are way overblown, probably more in the tens of thousands, but still, that's a lot. Where we're just like, who? Yeah, Qin Shi Huangdi? No. So, but getting into what Qin Shi Huangdi does to essentially establish safety and security, and I do mean safety and security. Notice I didn't say choice. Okay. First off, he does unify China. And this is probably the biggest thing to his credit, that he does stop the warfare. He makes it so everybody realizes there's no one else out there. There's no one else out there that's going to do something bad to them. The only army out there is the Qin army, so you better don't go against them, basically, and you're all right. But at least there's only one army out there that you have to worry about, not dozens. But then he also imposes a legalist government. Qin Shi Huangdi figures, and definitely a good argument for this at the time, that it worked for my state, it could work for all China, and we'll become the greatest we've ever been, just ever. And between these two things, yeah, you get the establishment of, well, China. But then you get into things that, well, especially us today, would be like, no. He destroyed almost all Confucius and Taoists, basically, books, writings. And he doesn't just do that. I'm being nice here when I put that in there. He also kills a lot of them too. Any Confucian scholar or Taoist monk that he views as a threat to his new society, he seeks to do away with them. This is an incredibly totalitarian way to think. Destroy all others that could challenge your authority in any way, shape, or form. Of course, according to legalism, that works. At least his form of legalism, I should say. We're just quite lucky that there was a lot of people in China that were able to hide away a lot of the Confucian and Taoist writings, so that we still have them today, to this day. But this is this is an act that we've seen throughout history a lot. It's not just Qin Shi Huangdi that does stuff like this. You had, say, when the Spanish came to the Americas, they ended up destroying a lot of the Mayan and Aztec writings. And because they viewed them as heretical, kind of heresy of the devil. And so why have them around? Probably one of the biggest examples we ever hear about these days is Hitler and how he tried to control information, so he burned books that did not agree with him. Well, this guy did it first. Hitler wasn't the first one. In fact, he's not really the first one either, but just, this happens. Not to justify it, but this happens a lot throughout history. When people realize, if I'm going to make sure the world's the way I want it to be, I need to get rid of everything that disagrees with me. So, now this one here, this is actually something that Qin Shi Huangdi, like, you look at it and it says, thank you very much. I just talked about how awful it is, at least from our perspective, of destroying all these writings. But this is something that is like, thank you. And that is, when I say standardized weights and measures, what happened during the Warring States period is every state came up with its own measurement system. Now, this means, like, you and I, we're used to what's called the standard measuring system. Inches, yards, miles, our standard ways of measuring things. There is another measurement system out there. It's called the metric system. That's what most of the rest of the world uses, actually. Basically going in meters, kilometers, grams, and those are the things of measurement. So we always have to, sometimes when we get a recipe, or sometimes when we're in a different country, we then have to compare, okay, what is this really in my own way of thinking? Anyways, In the Warring States period, they had dozens of different ways to measure things. You had no idea if you're getting cheated in a business transaction. You had basically was taking advantage of it. It was just so confusing, incredibly confusing. It was like, all right, we're done with this. We're going to have one money system. We're going to have one way of measuring things. Everything's just going to be the one way. I don't care about the culture of measurements and how you're used to one. We're getting rid of all the ones we don't like and keeping the one, just one. And this is something that, yes, is incredibly effective. It does allow for essentially a normalcy to be able to take place, a stability and an understanding that is not hard to understand for everybody to get along with each other better. In fact, one of the things that every book I've ever read about in Qin Shi Huangdi always loves to bring up the idea that he made the wagon wheels all the same width. And the reason why this was a big deal, and this lasts for over 2,000 years, this width of wagon wheels, every wagon had to be the same width. They couldn't have wider or less wide. It was because of the ruts that they made in the road. So when you have different width wagons, from travel and then erosion and things like that, the ruts get really bad, so you get a lot of breakdowns over time. But if you make every wagon the same width, then even when you get the ruts put in place, it's almost like inverted railroad tracks. And you don't have any breakdowns. Everybody's just fine. In fact, when you get into the Qing Dynasty, we're not going to talk about the Qing Dynasty. We're talking like 16, 17, 1800s there. They would even pave these ruts into the roads because it was just so normal from the time period of Qin Shi Huangdi. Anyways, that's one of the major things he does. And the last one, the thing that we're going to talk about for the rest of this lesson now, are his public works. Two in particular. The Great Wall, he is the guy that initiates that, and the Terracotta Soldiers. So, just getting into this. I'm pretty positive everybody here has seen pictures of the Great Wall before. Awesome. I personally, when I went to China, I got to hike along a stretch of about 6 miles where there was no one else around. One of my favorite things I've ever done in my life. It was awesome. But one of the things I noticed as I was looking at the Great Wall, and I hope you're getting the idea from this picture, they didn't look at the landscape and say, where's the easiest place to build a wall? They pretty much looked at the landscape and said, where's the hardest place to build a wall? Because if it's hard to build a wall there, then it's probably hard to get over. And so they did that. That's not as bad as it gets. That's kind of normal right there, what I'm showing you there. Just to give you some... Man, I wish I had I have a picture of this, and I probably should put it in. But when I was in the tour bus, driving out, we're about 2 hours outside of Beijing, China. And I was looking up at the mountains and pretty enthralled by them. I like mountain scenery. It's one of my favorite things. I love that about Utah, being here. But I was looking up, and I noticed that the tops of the mountains just looked really jagged. And I was like, that is so cool. So I wanted to take a picture of it. So I got on my camera, definitely not my phone. This was before that time. I shouldn't say before that time, but we hadn't really made the transition to you just have your phone with the camera on it. I was still living in a time where you have your phone and you have your camera. So I got out my camera and I took a picture, and I noticed as I looked at the photo, that wasn't, that jaggedness at the tops wasn't like the natural formations of the mountains. Those were guardhouses all along the tops. That was the Great Wall of China on the very tops of those mountains. I was driving through a nice, long, wide valley. They could have built the wall, and that nice valley would have been much easier, but no. They had to look up at the top of the mountain range. No joke. It's like looking at the Wasatch Front we have out the window here. Out our window, I guess. My classroom doesn't really face those, but you get the idea. And the wall being built across the top of all of those mountains, that's literally what I was looking at. It was beyond crazy to me that the effort it would take to do that. And yeah, it most definitely is one of the great wonders of the world for that reason. And it spans like 3,000 miles. They do this type of stuff. It goes over mountains and through deserts, just crazy. It is one of the most amazing things ever done in human history. There's a reason why we keep talking about this. It is one amazing feat that the Chinese do. Can't remember, do I have more? Yeah. Here's another picture of it that maybe helps you out a little bit with that. But it makes sense, especially when you want to defend yourself against those Xiongnu, those Hunnic, those Mongolian hordes, those Jurchens coming across on their horses. It's hard to ride up that, then hard to get over that wall. So as long as you have that wall manned, you got your scouts and your armies there, you're going to do pretty well. In fact, I'll just say this now because I know I'm not going to bring it up later in this lesson. The Great Wall of China actually works quite well as long as it was manned. It did not work very well when you, say, had corrupt people that could just get bribed and say, don't watch the wall, or when you had massive internal instability within the Chinese empires or Chinese dynasties where the armies on the walls were recalled to deal with rebellions and things like that. And so, of course, it's easy to get over a wall when no one's manning it. So I'm saying that because I hear this all the time where people say things like the Great Wall was one of the dumbest things ever built. They put all this effort into it and it was useless. It never worked. Yeah, it worked a lot. We just know about the times when it didn't work. And the only reason it didn't work wasn't because essentially the wall was inherently flawed. It's because the whole concept of what you do with the wall, you have a wall and you man it, was not fully upkept. So, anyways, holy cow, you did have to have a big army to man 3,000 miles. So, anyways, I'm getting a little bit too long-winded on this one, but if you can tell, I'm pretty impressed with this. Like, this is one of the more amazing things ever, and does show just to the the grandeur of the Chinese, like we talked about in the very first lesson. They think that they were on top and still think they are, and this is definitely one of those reasons you can look and say, well, yeah, definitely. So, but I totally forgot to mention this. Because they're building in this really harsh terrain, lots of people die. Again, according to Qin records, upwards 300,000 people die over the course of building this, over like the decade and a half that it took to build it. And by the way, this wall you're looking at here, this is I think the third time, or the second time that it's rebuilt since the time Qin Shi Huangdi made it 2,200 years ago. So technically his wall isn't necessarily the wall you're looking at here, but a lot of people die. And this is also why it's talked about how there's like bodies within the wall, because, well, yeah, that's what we're told. In many cases, as essentially the funeral for the people that died, it was hard to kind of bury them in the landscape there. So it's like, well, I guess you're going to become glue and mortar. And you just kind of shove them in there and they become part of the wall. So, now the next thing. Terracotta warriors or terracotta soldiers, the terracotta army, however you want to put this. Those were built by Qin Shi Huangdi to guard his tomb. That's the entire purpose for them. And again, one of these things we look at and say, holy cow, this was one dang awesome and amazing civilization to do something like this. Because those aren't factory-made terracotta soldiers. Each one, if you don't know this, is unique. And again, I do not know my numbers on this right now. The last time I looked numbers up was years ago. But when I first learned about this, it was something like 7,000 to 8,000 soldiers had been uncovered, dug out. The last time I looked, it was about 13,000 to 14,000. I wouldn't doubt if they're like at 18,000 now, soldiers uncovered. And it's believed, this is just speculation, but it's believed there's upwards 25,000 soldiers made. Which, by the way, does point to this idea that if this really truly is just the honor guard of Qin Shi Huangdi, meaning his personal bodyguard, 25,000 soldiers as a personal bodyguard, how big were his actual armies when he was conquering the state of Qin? Understanding or believing the records saying that there was more than just these guys. Maybe those numbers I told you earlier about like 250,000, 450,000 aren't as overblown when you look at it that way. Anyways. But the idea here is actually why they're built is a lot to do with kind of the way the Egyptians did their own thing. That they don't want to be disturbed. They don't want their resting place disturbed. You take with you into the afterlife. We think Qin Shi Huangdi had that same type of thought process. And he had this built to where if someone was just looking down this valley where they were built, they'd be scared off by this massive army that was just ever present. So the thing is that after it was built, it goes out of the knowledge of everybody. Like, no one remembers this. And the question is why? Well, one of the major reasons why is Qin Shi Huangdi didn't want to remember it. And if I have my story correct here, what I believe, what we believe happens, or what I remember reading about this, is that Qin Shi Huangdi actually ordered to have everybody that worked on this, that made the soldiers, that crafted all of this, to be killed. And many of them were actually killed inside the tomb itself, like they locked them in and suffocated them. So that knowledge of this wouldn't get out. Like in my mind, I can see so many flaws in his way of thinking, but again, it would go along with the legalist mindset. But yeah, this just this disappeared out of the mindset of history. And over time, of course, it does, like just everything else, just erosion, buildup of dirt and things like that, it just gets completely covered. So it's just not there anymore. And this is what you're seeing in these pictures here, is it's being uncovered. One of the ones that, I didn't realize until I actually went here and visited this place myself, is that when they uncover these soldiers for the first time, they're painted. They didn't, they look like real human beings. Like if you're standing afar off looking at this army, it looks like real human beings. Like those are real soldiers, like immortal soldiers ready to defend their emperor type stuff. Now, so I'm told, and what I read when I was there, it basically says within an hour or so, or a few hours of being uncovered, the paint just dissipates. Like when it hits the air, it just dissipates, and it goes back to looking like what you see in the bottom left, just these clay statues. But the Chinese have been basically for decades, have been going through just this painstaking process of uncovering, categorizing, organizing, and repairing all these terracotta soldiers. It's a painstaking process, but I'm thankful they're doing it. Because this is just beyond one of the more beyond amazing things ever done in all of human history. No one has really done something this crazy. This is easily on par with what the Egyptians do, or the Romans, or anybody else. So, anyways, this is the last thing we're talking about here. If this interests you anyway, I highly recommend you look these things up on your own. But at this point, we'll be done with this lesson, and I'll see you guys in the next one.